France and Germany might be Trump's unexpected allies in a new trade war with Beijing. That's right. While the world watches Washington and Beijing face off over electric vehicles, an entirely different alliance might be forming, one that's been flying under the radar. And at the center of it all, Donald Trump. The man who built his image on America first might now be leaning on Europe to help crush what he calls the EV invasion from China. But why France and Germany? Let's go back for a second. China's EV industry has exploded. BYD, NIO, XPeng. They're not just dominating at home, they're now aiming straight for Western markets. Europe's already feeling the heat. Cheap Chinese EVs are flooding into the EU, undercutting Volkswagen, Renault, Peugeot. France's President Macron has already sounded the alarm. Germany? Even more rattled. Their entire automotive legacy, BMW, Mercedes, Audi, sits on a razor's edge as Chinese EVs push into their turf. Now enter Trump. He's not just railing against China in campaign rallies. He's targeting their EVs specifically. He's promising massive tariffs. He's even talking about banning certain Chinese auto imports outright. But here's the twist. Behind closed doors, European automakers might be getting the nod. Sources say Trump advisors have floated the idea of loosening import restrictions on select European carmakers, especially those that manufacture EVs or hybrids outside of China. It's classic Trump. Hit one side hard, give the other just enough rope to do business, on his terms. And France and Germany? They're listening. With the EU already launching its own investigation into Chinese EV subsidies, the timing lines up. French auto giant Stellantis, which owns Peugeot and Citroën, is reportedly exploring more North American manufacturing to gain favor with US regulators. Germany's Volkswagen is increasing its push into US electric production through its Chattanooga plant. But rumors suggest they could also gain preferential treatment under a Trump administration. Why would Trump do this? It's simple. He doesn't see Europe as the immediate threat. China is. And if allowing French and German EVs into the US weakens BYD or Geely's ambitions, that's a win in his playbook. He gets to look tough on China, support lower-cost EV options for American consumers, and still sidestep direct clashes with US automakers who are falling behind. But this new alliance isn't just about trade. It's about leverage. Imagine this. Trump returns to the White House. On day one, he slaps a 60% tariff on Chinese EVs. European automakers, suddenly more competitive, rush to fill the gap. In exchange, Trump demands European cooperation on NATO funding, defense contracts, or even tech data sharing. He's not building an alliance out of goodwill. He's weaponizing the car industry, and China knows it. Chinese officials have already warned about retaliation if the US follows Europe's lead on EV tariffs. But if Trump ropes in France and Germany to create a unified Western front, Beijing could be facing a coordinated wall that blocks its most aggressive EV expansion. Meanwhile, American companies like Ford and GM, they're stuck in the middle. On one hand, they can't compete with China's prices. On the other, they may suddenly have to fight with European imports, made more attractive by a Trump deal. And then there's Tesla. Elon Musk has a massive factory in Shanghai. He sells Teslas made in China, back into Europe, and even into North America. If Trump pulls the trigger on China EV tariffs, Tesla could get caught in the crossfire unless Musk finds a way to play both sides or, perhaps, make a quiet deal of his own. This alliance Trump is building, it's not official, not yet. But whispers are growing louder. Leaked memos, EU trade envoys meeting with American lobbyists, Stellantis executives attending closed-door policy dinners in D.C., and while the mainstream media focuses on border walls and campaign slogans, something far more strategic may be unfolding. The auto industry becoming Trump's next global chessboard. So where does this leave China? Are they going to accept being boxed out of both the EU and US? Absolutely not. They're already pivoting to South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, regions less controlled by the West. BYD is building plants in Brazil and Mexico. Geely's investing in electric buses in Kenya and Nigeria. But if Trump's plan works, if he can fuse American protectionism with selective European access, he could dramatically reshape the global auto trade. Not just for a year or two, but for decades. And that raises a bigger question. What happens to the balance of power in the global EV race if this Trump-Europe alliance solidifies? Because this isn't just about tariffs or trade. It's about who controls the next generation of mobility. China has spent years building dominance in lithium supply chains, battery technology, and low-cost EV manufacturing. They've leapfrogged traditional automakers in some areas, especially in smart connectivity and in-car tech. Now, just as they're on the verge of turning that dominance into market control, Trump is attempting to slam the door shut. But here's the twist. Europe doesn't want a full-blown trade war either. Germany depends heavily on exports to China. Mercedes and BMW sell millions of units there. Macron, too, has courted Chinese investment into French green tech and infrastructure. So if they back Trump too enthusiastically, they risk losing China's market. That's why this alliance, if it's real, is so fragile, so calculated. It's not a formal partnership. It's a transactional alignment. Europe wants protection from Chinese undercutting. Trump wants leverage against China and a chance to look like he's rescuing the American worker. It's all about optics and pressure, both economic and political. And in the shadows, automakers are already adapting. Stellantis is reportedly reviewing plans to shift more of its EV and hybrid assembly to North America. Volkswagen has accelerated its rollout of US-built EVs under its ID lineup. Even Renault, which hasn't had a presence in the US for decades, is rumored to be exploring backdoor entry via partnerships or joint ventures. Trump, meanwhile, could make it easier for these companies to bypass some of the protectionist red tape, especially if they pledge to create jobs in key swing states. At the same time, China isn't sitting still. BYD has launched a lobbying effort in Washington. They're framing themselves as job creators, pointing to potential EV assembly plants in Mexico or even the southern US. They're trying to flip the narrative that Chinese investment can be part of America's green future. And with Tesla still producing in Shanghai, there's a faction within the US business world that wants to keep that China connection open, or at least flexible. But Trump, he sees the EV battleground as his chance to reassert dominance. He missed the tech revolution of the 2000s. He watched as the US lagged in semiconductor manufacturing. But the auto industry, that's something tangible, something voters understand. And EVs, with their foreign batteries and smart tech and Chinese price tags, that's a villain he can name. And by bringing France and Germany into the equation, he makes it harder for critics to claim isolationism. He frames it as a Western industrial revival, an alliance of manufacturing powers standing up to unfair Chinese subsidies. It's a populist message with a geopolitical edge, but it also sets up the next collision. Because if this pressure campaign succeeds, if tariffs rise, if imports fall, if Chinese automakers are boxed out, what happens when prices go up? When EV adoption slows down? When the climate goals set by both US and EU leaders start to look further and further away? That's when the cracks in this alliance might start to show. France, for all its talk of economic sovereignty, is still deeply invested in keeping EVs affordable for its citizens. Germany, despite its industrial might, is already facing internal political pressure over high energy costs and economic stagnation. If Trump's tariff-heavy strategy leads to higher vehicle prices in the US and Europe follows suit, there's a risk of backlash, not just from consumers, but from the very automakers both regions are trying to protect. And then there's the question of supply chains.